Hello there and welcome back, guys. After finishing the Abrams in the last part, I wanted to go back in time to the beginning of tanks. And you guys voted for the French FT-17 from Meng. A quick overview of what's in the box. Next to the instructions you get a colored painting guide and 10 plastic sprues. On these sprues you get parts for the FT-17 itself, as well as a nice diorama base to show off your finished tank. The included decals let you choose between two markings. In addition you get some photo etched parts and some metal parts for the suspension. On top of that, the track is movable and does not require any glue. But enough of that, and without further ado, let's begin the construction. The parts were all removed by using my side cutters. The cleanup is done with my hobby knife and sanding sticks. You don't need the expensive sanding sticks made for scale modeling. Cheap single-use nail files work just as well. To remove any extruding ejector pins, I begin by carefully sanding them down and then scraping off the rest with my sharp blade. But in this case it was redundant because this part will be completely covered in the next step. The level of detail on these parts is really amazing. You even have the anti-slip texture on the barely visible pedals molded in. The main glue I will be using through the build is Tamiya's extra thin cement. It's great for small plastic parts like these and it's my most recommended glue. A second floor panel is glued on top of the bottom plate. That's why sanding the pins was kind of useless. Most parts are detailed on all sides, so you have to follow the instructions closely to not accidentally attach them facing the wrong side. As you can see, the kit includes an interior for the driver's place. That's why I will try to keep the hatches open and paint the inside as well. Would be the first model where I worked on an actual interior. I don't want to glue the side panels to the bottom panel yet to make painting easier. That's why I will dry fit some parts and then glue connecting parts only to one half. To make work on the smaller parts easier, I sometimes use a third hand, usually used for soldering. This is part of the rear deck. It is not only the interior that has lots of details, but the entire tank. That's why tweezers are recommended and almost necessary for a kit like this. Small photo-etched parts can be glued with Tamiya cement as well. It is not really gluing, but more melting the plastic and pressing the metal parts inside it. But it works for me. Now comes the really tiny turret. The kit provides you with two options. An 8mm M1914 Hotchkiss machine gun or a 37mm gun. I chose the 37mm gun not only because it looks better in my opinion, but this also gives me the option to later add the Hotchkiss machine gun with its tripod to the diorama. The small parts make it a little bit more difficult, but overall the fit on these parts was perfect and I had no problems on this step. The gun is constructed in a way to allow for a few degrees of horizontal motion without rotating the turret, but this part I glued in position for additional strength. The turret itself was really fun to build. I built it like a real vehicle with each panel added separately. The locator pins made sure every panel is perfectly centered, resulting in a perfect fit. The rear features a hatch to access the inside. And since the turret inside is detailed as well, I will try to build in an open position. But the turret is kept separate for easier painting. Before I can continue building, I have to paint the interior. Most tanks inside are painted white. That's why I chose Vallejo's grey primer as my base color. The turret was a bit more difficult due to its small size and inwardly angled plates, but it worked. On top of the grey primer I added a layer of Vallejo white. The difference is not really visible on camera, in fact it was almost not visible even with my eyes, but trust me, it is there. For the floor there seems to be different variations. Some tanks have a white floor while others have an olive green one. I chose the olive green one to add some nice contrast. Any areas I need to keep white are covered with masking tape. Next is some very basic chipping for the white parts. The color I used for that is Revell Aqua Color Tank Grey. I load off most of the paint on a paper towel until it only leaves faint marks. The sponge is then lightly tapped over the interior. This leaves only small chips and focuses them on the edges and details. You could do all of this with a fine brush, but the sponge makes it easier and faster while making the chips more random. And now I can paint the details inside. The pedals, steering levers and the hand throttle are all painted flat black with Revell Aqua Color. And the part of the gun that sticks inside the turret is painted black as well. I applied the same chipping I did inside the hull here in the turret as well. The anti-slip texture at the bottom is a perfect base for metal chipping. I use AK's weathering pencils for this. All I have to do is scrape the pencil over the surface, only adding metal color to the raised parts. The seat and the backrest were made from leather. There are some really nice tutorials out there for a realistic leather look, but for me using a simple leather brown was enough here. Now all the basic painting inside the tank is done. Any additional weathering is possible in the finished tank later. That means I can finally put the hull together. I remove the paint from most contact points using my hobby knife. That way the glue has an easier time reacting, and that should make my work a lot less complicated. Here I noticed how far you can actually look inside the empty tank where the engine would be. To create a barrier I cut a styrene card to shape and glue it in the middle. This not only hides the empty engine bay, but also increases the overall strength. I kept it white to match the white walls. These parts on each side were really difficult to attach correctly. It took me quite some time off camera to get them in the right position. The suspension has some real metal parts and springs included. They don't add any movement to the suspension here, but there are some great details. And what you just saw was me attaching these parts wrong. This is how they have to look, but I realized later that I missed a step and put the metal rods upside down. The tool clamps on this side have a very small photo-etched part for the strap. But the instructions were not really clear about how to bend this part, and I could not figure it out myself, so I just decided to leave them off, as if they have fallen off during traveling. For the bigger photo-etched parts I used regular superglue. Many tanks used in trench warfare during World War I had an unditching tail attached to their backs. Like the name suggests, it's supposed to make driving through the destroyed landscape and trenches easier. It is quite fragile at first, but after this crossbeam it becomes a lot more sturdy. Of course, a few details can't be missed. Then the tail is added to the rear. When adding the engine covers, I discovered a problem. I misplaced the top plate by a millimeter, and this results in this unavoidable gap here. The only way to fix this is by covering it with something else. But I also spilled some superglue on this part, so I would have to cover these mistakes anyway. And for that I will create some tabs with green stuff. Green stuff is a 2-part epoxy putty that begins to harden once the yellow and blue parts are mixed together. Green stuff is very sticky, so it starts to stick to every tool you use. To make it less sticky you can use talcum powder, most commonly used as baby powder. I cover all the tools with the powder and then roll the green stuff into a thin sheet. To get the right shape, I can use scissors for cutting. Then all I have to do is to create some folds and place it on my tank. The green stuff takes a few hours to harden. Next up is the running gear that is attached to each side. The running gear is very detailed and to my knowledge very accurate, but that makes it quite the challenge. The wheels for each side are made in these bigger configurations, one with 5 and one with 4 wheels. In theory, you can build them to stay completely movable, but they are so flimsy that you have to debate whether they are worth it or not. I tried as much as I could, but if the part started to fall apart from just looking at it wrong, I used glue. The rail holding the return rollers was a lot better. This part here has to be held in place with a metal rod. Here the third hand was really helpful, and I did not even have to use any glue for this last wheel. With all the smaller parts done, I now have to add them to these larger plates. Once the smaller parts were attached here, the whole thing was a lot less flimsy and easier to handle. This pin holds the drive sprocket in place and connects the whole rear part to the hull later. To make attaching the tracks later easier, I did not use any glue here and kept it loose. And this is just one of those detailed parts where I'm asking myself why. Not because it's difficult, because these springs are not difficult to attach, but why do I have to add them? They are inside the running gear in between two plates. There is not a single angle I could look at these and see the detail. But well, I guess they are here and have to be added. Building such an old tank is just fascinating. There are so many parts where you can see they had the right idea, but just made it 10 times more difficult, and in the end it was still not optimal. It's quite a difference to the Abrams I built a few weeks ago. Like I said, these running gears look really nice. And now I have to do it once more for the other side. I will keep them separate for now and only attach them permanently after I finished painting. But the tracks on this kit are probably the easiest ones I have ever made. Just take two pieces, click them together, no glue, no cutting, nothing. Repeat that 32 times for each side and you have your workable tracks. And don't worry if some links are damaged or you lost them. There are more links included than you need for the two tracks. Okay, that's all for the tank, but there is still some plastic left in the box. Meng was so nice to include a complete base plate featuring a trench part and a landscape for the diorama. The construction here is very straightforward. Remove parts from their sprue, do some cleaning up, and then snap them together. For more stability, I used the thicker Tamiya cement here. A simple base like this is a good foundation for a diorama, I would say. And with that, the construction part is finished, and we can take a look at how far we have come in this part. I think this is a really well designed kit so far. Not only was this my first World War I tank, but it was also my first French tank and my first time doing some interior work. I am really excited about the painting and the weathering, as well as working on the diorama base. If you don't want to miss me doing that, please subscribe to my channel. I would greatly appreciate that. And if you enjoyed this part, why not leave a like if you have already come this far. Any feedback or suggestions, let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.